Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. After having discussed quite a number of surahs now that explain how a Muslim should not be grieving over the past and should not be fearing of the future, and instead a Muslim should be struggling in the cause of Islam, I wanted to spend now the next couple of lectures just focusing on the examples of prophets. And I think that's very important because the more we study the stories of prophets, the more we can understand that tests and difficulties and hardships are not just things that are unique to us. And this is essential because a lot of us sometimes feel that the kind of difficulties that we are experiencing are so unique. And that just goes to show that Allah, He's upset with us, He's angry at us, or He has forsaken us because He keeps throwing more things at us and He doesn't seem to be giving us any form of relief. And so in this context, when we study the stories of prophets, we're able to see that these are people who Allah truly loved. Yet when you study their lives, it seems to be one difficulty after the next, It's sort of non-stop. And so through this, we're able to get a different perspective about tests and hardships. We're able to understand that tests and hardships really are a grooming period. And the fact that when Allah starts to test you or He puts you through extreme hardship, it's not because He hates you, it's not because He's angry at you, but because there is a potential inside of you that He's trying to unleash. And more importantly, Allah's not going to do it Himself. If Allah wanted to, He could have simply unleashed that great potential that is inside of you. But then, that defeats the purpose of life being a test. That defeats the entire purpose of life being a journey. So the idea is that we have to unleash our own potential by discovering ourselves, by understanding how unique and beautiful Allah has in fact made each and every one of us. The fact that each of us has this amazing set of traits and qualities and strengths that can only be realized when we are going through a test or through a difficulty, because that's when you understand that you actually had more strength, more courage, more conviction and patience than you ever thought you had before. So in this respect, I wanted to start off by studying the story of Musa alayhi salam. Now, when Musa alayhi salam was a young child, he was raised in the house of the Pharaoh. And many of us are very well acquainted with his story. When he was a baby, he was separated from his mother because the Pharaoh at that time, whose name was Ramesses I, he had introduced this policy whereby all the young male babies born of Bani Israel were being killed. And there are different reasons for this. Some scholars believe that he saw a dream, and in his dream it was believed that there was a prophet who would be born amongst Bani Israel, and that prophet would eventually give a lot of power to Bani Israel, and he would take away the power of the Pharaoh. While other narrations state that it wasn't really a dream, but it was the fact that the Pharaoh realized that Bani Israel was increasing so much in size that they numbered approximately 600,000. And the fear was that, as their size keeps increasing, they will eventually be able to form an army and dethrone the Pharaoh. So as a result, he introduced this policy. But regardless of what the reason actually was, once this policy was being implemented and hundreds and thousands of male babies and male infants born of Bani Israel were being killed, Musa alayhi salam's mother was given inspiration by Allah. And she was told to take Musa alayhi salam as a baby, put him into a basket and put the basket into the river, and so that he could be saved. And eventually we know that the basket, as it was flowing in the river, it was picked up by the Pharaoh's household, and it was subsequently then Musa alayhi salam was raised in the Pharaoh's home. So while Bani Israel, the entire nation to whom Musa alayhi salam belonged, whilst they were constantly suffering persecution and torture at the hands of the Pharaoh, Musa alayhi salam, being someone of Bani Israel, was experiencing a lot of splendor and comfort and luxury because he was living in the Pharaoh's home. So he was not facing any form of persecution and torture. But of course, we know from the story that every time he would see the Israelites being persecuted, it would hurt him tremendously because he saw it as a sign of extreme injustice. Now, later on in the story, we know that a specific incident took place where Musa alayhi salam saw a man of Bani Israel who was having a fight with a local Egyptian. And so assuming that the local Egyptian must be the one who was persecuting or who was harming the Israelite, Musa alayhi salam intervened and he punched the local Egyptian, but unfortunately his punch was so strong that it killed the Egyptian on the spot. So Musa alayhi salam had killed the man by mistake. It was an accident. But of course, he knew that the consequence of this would be severe. So as soon as he found out that the Pharaoh has been informed and now a death sentence has been given for Musa alayhi salam, in fear, Musa ran and he left Egypt and went through the desert of the Sinai Peninsula to a city of Madian. Okay, and we know that he remained there for approximately 8 to 10 years. He got married, he had children, he had a family of his own, and then he decides to now come back to Egypt. And up till now, of course, he is not a prophet. He has not been selected as being a messenger of God. But on the way back, when he is returning from the city of Madian to Egypt, he is informed by Allah that he has been selected to be a prophet. Allah speaks to him, Allah shows him many signs, and Allah informs him of what his mission is. His mission is that he has to give the message of Tawheed to the Pharaoh, and he has to instruct the Pharaoh that he needs to free Bani Israel so that Bani Israel will no longer stay there as slaves. Now, of course, upon hearing this mission of his, Musa alayhi salam is terrified. He's terrified of facing the Pharaoh, knowing that the Pharaoh had already given a death sentence for Musa alayhi salam approximately 10 years ago. But initially, as you hear the story, you see that certain things started to happen which made his mission initially a little bit easy. For instance, he was given a lot of signs and miracles that he was able to show the Pharaoh as well as the people of Pharaoh. We also know that as soon as he came back, there was an entire group of Bani Israel that numbered 600,000 who believed in Musa alayhi salam and gave Musa alayhi salam their support. Right, that was another positive thing in his entire journey. Again, it raised hope and it made his mission a little bit easy. Don't forget, as I said, Musa alayhi salam was never raised with the people of Bani Israel. He was raised in the palace of the Pharaoh. So he had never experienced the torture and the torment of the Israelites. So there was this fear that as soon as he enters into Egypt and he tells the Israelites that he's a prophet, they might not accept him. You know, they might have this anger towards him that how can you be our prophet? You have not experienced the torture and the torment that we have experienced. You were raised in the Pharaoh's house and then you just ran and you left us for almost 10 years. And now suddenly, you're coming back and you're telling us that you are our prophet who will grant us our freedom. Right? So there was this fear that this might be the response of the Israelites, but it wasn't. Then besides this, we also know that Musa alayhi salam was given permission by Allah that he will be supported by his brother Harun. So Harun alayhi salam is also made a prophet. In other words, Musa alayhi salam is not being told that he has to conduct this entire mission on his own. He has the support of his brother. That's another plus point, right? It's something else that makes his mission a little bit more easy. And then we also know in the story that once he talks to the Pharaoh ends up organizing this entire festival. Right? He calls all these sorcerers. He is convinced that Musa alayhi salam will be defeated and he will be humiliated. But on the contrary, Musa alayhi salam comes out victorious and the sorcerers end up prostrating and believing in Allah in front of everyone. That is another huge positive sign for Musa alayhi salam in his mission. Right? So initially you see that things are going great for Musa alayhi salam. There's like this period of ease. He thought it would be incredibly difficult. He thought that the minute he was standing in front of the Pharaoh would kill him. On the contrary, it seems like things are going pretty smooth, right? Bani Israel has accepted him. The Pharaoh hasn't killed him. The Pharaoh himself organized a festival and the sorcerers ended up prostrating to Allah and embracing Islam. So it seems like things were going pretty good. But then after that, everything changes. So after that short period of ease, that period of relief that Musa alayhi salam was being given, now you see a lot of difficulty. So first of all, you see that the Pharaoh, he decides to start persecuting and torturing Bani Israel even more as a consequence, just to show his anger towards Musa alayhi salam. Right? In particular, he decides that, okay, being Ramesses II, he wants to reintroduce the policy that his father, Ramesses I, implemented by executing all male babies and male infants of Bani Israel again. So in the history of Bani Israel, this is now happening a second time. First, it was done by Ramesses I. Now it's being done by Ramesses II. Right? But the first time it was introduced, the Israelites did not have a prophet with them. Now, when it's being introduced, the Israelites are now looking towards Musa alayhi salam because this time they have a prophet. So while their male babies are being taken out of their homes and they're being killed and persecuted, and we also know that pregnant women were being killed at that time, there was massive bloodshed taking place. The Israelites were looking towards Musa alayhi salam that, Musa, you are a messenger, you are a prophet that Allah has sent, so do something, save us. And Musa alayhi salam, who was known for not being able to stand any act of injustice, he couldn't do anything because he is a Rasul, so he has to abide by the commands of Allah. And until Allah doesn't tell him exactly what to do, he cannot do anything. And when he invokes Allah and when he prays to Allah, Allah simply gives him one command, that tell Bani Israel that they should designate certain houses that are facing the Qibla and they should all start praying. So while the male babies are being executed and killed, while pregnant women are being killed, the command coming from Allah is pray. That's it. Musa alayhi salam is not being told that you have a group of 600,000 people, start fighting. Allah is with you. Allah will send angels. Allah will protect your children. Allah will strengthen you. Right? So many things could have happened when Allah is already sending so many miracles, like the staff converting into a snake and so on. Of course, Allah could have sent some more miracles. He could have sent angels as well. But the command that was given is that there will be no miracle at this point. Just show sabr. And so at that point, for a person like Musa alayhi salam, who cannot stand an act of injustice, it was the most difficult period of time that he had to endure. And what made it worse is that Bani Israel, they would come up to him and they would complain. And they would say, ever since you've come to us, Musa, as a prophet, you've actually made our lives worse. So yes, prior to you being a prophet, we were being persecuted and, there was a lot of difficulty we had to endure. But now it just seems like our life has become so much more worse because the Pharaoh is upset with you and with your message. And he's taking out the anger on us. And you being a prophet, you're simply telling us to pray to God and you're telling us to show sabr, that's it. Right? And that, of course, made his his life a lot more difficult because being a prophet, he has to continue motivating Bani Israel. He has to continue encouraging them to not lose hope in the mercy of Allah. And then besides this, what makes it so much more difficult is that Musa alayhi salam is constantly commanded by Allah that go back to the Pharaoh, go back to the Pharaoh's ministers and keep giving them the message of Allah in a polite and a soft tone. So the Pharaoh who is responsible for these atrocious crimes, the Pharaoh who is responsible for all the difficulties that are being endured by Bani Israel, Musa alayhi salam is told to go to that same Pharaoh and keep giving him the message of Tawheed in a case he ends up embracing Islam, in which case he can save himself in the Akhirah. Just imagine for a second how difficult that is. Imagine what Allah is asking from a prophet. Yes, Musa is a prophet, but as you can see, he's a human being. He has a nafs, he has emotions. And this is what is being asked of him. And then on top of that, when Allah started to send tests and hardships to the nation of Egypt, at one point it started to rain blood. Then it started to rain frogs, rain locusts. A plague came, a famine came, a flood came. So many different short periods of azab were sent in order to encourage the nation to take Musa alayhi salam's message seriously. Every time there was this kind of a punishment that was being introduced, the entire nation of Egypt would end up cursing Musa and Harun. They would say that all of this is happening because of Musa alayhi salam. Prior to this, we never had the situation of there being a rain of blood or of frogs or locusts. This is happening to us because Musa is cursed. And since he's cursed, that's why our life is becoming miserable. So it's not just Bani Israel now who seems to be getting a little bit irritated with Musa alayhi salam and they're becoming impatient, but now the local Egyptians are also becoming impatient because suddenly their lives have become difficult too. And they're blaming it also on Musa alayhi salam. So imagine now how many people in the city are absolutely despising Musa alayhi salam and they're blaming him for their misfortune. And while all of this is going on, Musa's a prophet. He has to face people. He has to give them the message of Islam. He has to be polite and gentle to them. He cannot yell and scream at them. He cannot just run away. He cannot say, Allah, this is too difficult for me. I cannot do this anymore. Right? He cannot give up. That's an option. That's a choice Allah has not given him. He has to stay there and be patient and keep giving people the message of Tawheed and telling them to show sabr and hope. Most importantly, have hope in Allah's mercy. So of course, when this period of difficulty now that he's facing, when this prolongs, and Allah knows now that the heart of my slave, it's becoming too much for him to take. Eventually then, when the period of time has reached its limit, and the Pharaoh has been given the message for several years, at that point Allah then informs Musa alayhi salam that take Bani Israel and run, and now the azab is coming for Pharaoh and for the nation of Pharaoh. So at that point, Musa alayhi salam is now taking Bani Israel. He's running towards the sea splits in half. The Bani Israelites are able to see a beautiful miracle, a time of Furqan, and Musa alayhi salam is able to save the entire nation of Israelites while the entire nation of Pharaoh perishes. Right? Again, now you see there's an immense period of ease now that has come because finally they are free. No more persecution, no more torture. Musa alayhi salam, who told everyone that he's a prophet and he has been sent for them and that he will free them, has now fulfilled his promise. So you see a period of ease that has come. But then after this, you now have another period of difficulty because the nation of Muslims who have just been freed after witnessing a miracle are now going against Musa alayhi salam again. So the nation that should be so humbled, so thankful to Allah that 400 years of slavery has finally ended, and it's ended through this huge sign, this huge miracle that was shown to them, and now they have freedom. They have freedom to practice their religion, to practice Tawheed. Now that same nation is getting upset with Musa alayhi salam, and they're constantly transgressing and they're constantly complaining. So when Allah gives them manna salwa, this special beautiful food that is descending from the heavens, they start to complain. They start to tell Musa alayhi salam, every day we cannot have the same manna salwa. We miss the kind of variety and amazing products that we used to eat when we were in Egypt. So suddenly the nation has forgotten the torture, the torment, the difficulty that they experienced at that time, and they are now actually missing it. And they're missing it simply because they have to eat manna salwa every day. Just because of that reason, they have forgotten the torture and the torment, and they're actually looking back at their time in Egypt and saying, well, at least we had so much different, variety of foods. And over here now we're just stuck with two kinds of foods, manna and salwa. And then furthermore, when Allah granted Bani Israel the beautiful 10 commandments, thereby raising their status to becoming an ummah, right, giving them this very brief, short kind of a sharia, these laws by which they can now govern their community and society, they end up constantly going against the commandments. They end up constantly transgressing, right? Allah tells them in the commandments not to murder, not to kill, and they end up killing. Allah tells them in the commandments not to commit shirk, not to worship idols, and they end up desiring an idol so that they can worship it. And it's incredible irony because they just came from a nation of Pharaoh that were accustomed to worshipping idols, right? Bani Israel were living amongst them and they never had a desire to worship idols at that time. They despised the worship of idols. They only wanted to worship the one true God, while Pharaoh and his entire nation was busy worshipping all kinds of different idols. And now when they've been granted freedom by that one true main God, they suddenly have a desire to worship idols. It's complete irony, and you can imagine the frustration of Musa alayhi salam, that why could his nation not understand something as simple as the fact that the one God has saved you, and you lived an entire lifetime under the Pharaoh, never wanting to worship idols. Why would you suddenly have a desire to worship idols now? And then furthermore, when Allah tells Bani Israel that you can now have a land, a country, a place of your own, which has been prepared for you. You don't have to live in this desert, in the Sinai Peninsula, because, if the fact that you have to eat manna salwa every day, if that's bothering you, if the heat is bothering you, then you don't have to live in this place anymore. Allah has prepared a city for you. and it's called the land of Canaan. It's the promised land. And all you have to do is just do jihad. So there are people already living in that land, and they are people who are busy worshipping idols. They are evil people. All you have to do is do jihad. Allah is with you. Allah's promises, He will make sure that you are victorious. He will make sure that you win. You just have to do jihad and enter that land. And Bani Israel blatantly say, no, we will not do it. They have the audacity to tell Musa alayhi salam, why don't you go and fight? And once the people have left, then just inform us, and then we will go ahead and enter. But we're not doing jihad. So after having seen all the miracles that they needed to see, after having been granted freedom, and after being promised by Allah that this is a land that Allah has prepared for you, just do jihad, Allah's promising you victory, they simply say no. Because now, they're getting used to the fact that Allah should do everything for us. If Allah can free us from the Pharaoh through a miracle, then Allah can also prepare that land for us and kick out those people through a miracle. Why should we fight? And as a result of their blatantly going against Allah's command, Allah gave a punishment that Bani Israel will not be allowed to enter the promised land for 40 years. So that entire generation that got freed from Pharaoh and that refused to do jihad, that entire generation will not be able to see the beautiful promised land that Allah had prepared for them. 40 years later, the next generation, when they became older and who they were willing to do jihad, they were able to see the promised land. But the generation that actually got freed from the Pharaoh and refused to fight, they were not able to witness that promised land. And the unfortunate part is, Musa and Harun, they have to live with now this transgressing nation of Bani Israel for 40 years in the desert as well. So even though it's not Musa alayhi salam's fault, even though it's not his brother's fault, they cannot leave their nation and go ahead and enter the promised land. They have to stay in the desert for 40 years, constantly giving tabligh to their nation because Musa alayhi salam is a Rasul. He cannot leave his nation. Imagine this prolonged period of hardship now, prolonged period of difficulty where you have to try and constantly give tabligh to a transgressing, ungrateful nation. And you have to do it for 40 years because you have to try and save as many people as you can from Jahannam. And this is something that Musa alayhi salam had to do. Now in this case, what you see is when there's such a long period of difficulty, Allah knew that it's difficult for His slave's heart to bear. Because at the end of the day, he's a human being. He has a nafs and he has emotions. So previously, what you see is that Allah had a period of difficulty, then a period of ease, then a period of difficulty, then a period of ease. But now the period of difficulty seems to be going on for a very, very long time. So in that difficulty, during that difficulty, Allah gives periods of ease. And the periods of ease that Musa alayhi salam was given was the fact that Allah chose to speak to him directly without Jibreel coming in the middle. And we see this because when Musa alayhi salam is talking to Allah and he's explaining to Allah how much he's grieving and how difficult the mission is becoming for him, Allah informs Musa alayhi salam that I have chosen to speak to you. So unlike all the messengers and prophets, with you, I have selected you because I directly speak to you. I don't speak to anyone directly. So Allah knew that because Musa's mission was unique, there is no other prophet that is mentioned, who had to go and save their nation. Their nation is incredibly transgressing. And so now they have to live with their nation in a desert for 40 years. You don't see that example anywhere else. Because Musa alayhi salam's example is so unique that first he has to deal with the transgressing nation of Pharaoh, then he has to deal with his own transgressing nation of Muslims. Because his situation was so unique, in his difficulty, Allah put ease. So instead of saying, okay, your ease will come after the period of difficulty, in this case, because the period of difficulty is so long, Allah put ease inside it. And He put ease inside it by talking to His slave. Because every time Allah would speak to Musa alayhi salam, it would relieve and calm his heart. It would console him. It would give him that boost of positive energy that he needed to continue on with his mission and not give up. Now, what we learn from all of this is that when we are going through difficult periods as well, Allah will either make sure that there's a period of difficulty, and when it ends, He will give you a period of ease. He will make sure that things start to get better again. But then after that, there will be another period of difficulty. That is the way life goes on. So when we face difficulty, ease, these kind of alternating days of fortune, it's not that, okay, Allah, He must be upset with me because now He sent me another test. And now again He sent me another test, so therefore He must hate me. That's not how Allah works. Life is supposed to be a test. It's supposed to be varying days of fortune. Days of difficulty, days of ease. Days of difficulty, days of ease. Allah will give you a period of breather in between so that you can muster up your energy again. But you have to muster it up to start fighting again because another test is coming. And then at the same time, when you are facing difficulty, then not only will Allah eventually give you a period of ease, but sometimes when the difficulty is too long or too intense, Allah will give you ease within that difficulty to make the test bearable for you. In the case of Musa, Allah spoke to Musa. In the case of us, Allah will choose whatever is the best means of calming and consoling your heart, but that consolation will come. That ease within the difficulty will come. The only thing is you have to try and find it. So if you have a mindset where you're just always complaining and the only time you will stop complaining is when the test has been removed, then you won't see the ease that is inside the difficulty. You won't see how your test could have become 100 times more difficult, but Allah has actually put ease in it, and there are many things that could have made your test worse, but Allah has chosen not to make it worse. That silver lining you just won't see because you're just constantly complaining about the test itself. And then finally, to answer the question, but why are we tested so much in the first place? Like I said in the beginning, we have to unleash that potential that is inside of us. So what potential was being unleashed of Musa alayhi salam? If you remember, I told you that Musa alayhi salam could not stand a little bit of injustice. And Musa alayhi salam was raised in a life of luxury and comfort. So even though he had a very soft corner for the people of Bani Israel, he had not endured that level of persecution and that level of torture. He hadn't seen that kind of difficulty. Now Allah knew that in the future, not only is he going to be a prophet, he's going to be the leader of an ummah. And Allah knew that he's going to be a leader of an ummah that keeps transgressing, that shows a lot of disobedience, that keeps arguing with their prophet. And if Musa alayhi salam cannot stand a little bit of injustice because he starts getting so incredibly angry, or if Musa alayhi salam he's not used to living in a place where there's so much difficulty, so much hardship, because he's accustomed to a life of comfort, he's not going to be able to fulfill his mission. He's not going to be able to lead a nation of 600,000 Bani Israelites in the desert for 40 years. He's going to keep getting angry and keep getting frustrated. He might even leave his nation in anger. He might even leave the nation because of, the kind of difficulty that he has to face for 40 years in the desert in the heat. Right? So Allah knew that he needs to be groomed. He needs to be trained. Allah is not just going to inject those qualities inside of him. Allah is not just going to unleash that potential by himself. Musa has to do it. Musa alayhi salam has to unleash those amazing qualities inside of him. He at the moment is very impatient, and at the moment he cannot stand a bit of injustice. He becomes too angry, but there's a lot of sabr inside of him. There's a lot of calmness inside of him which he still hasn't realized. Okay, and at times when he sees a lot of difficulty, he starts to panic, right? He starts to become impatient, but there's a lot of sabr inside of him. And of course, we see that sabr just by the mere fact that he politely kept giving tabligh for 40 years in the desert. But Musa alayhi salam needs to be able to unleash that potential. So during that time of the Pharaoh, Allah put such difficulties in front of Musa alayhi salam that the man who could not stand an act of injustice, he could not see two people fighting. He could not see an Egyptian fighting with someone of Bani Israel. Now he has to stand the ultimate act of injustice. He has to see innocent little babies and toddlers, male babies of Bani Israel, being killed, which of course is the ultimate act of injustice because you're killing something so incredibly innocent. He has to witness it. He has to witness the parents grieving. He has to witness Bani Israel coming up to Musa alayhi salam and asking him to do something, and he is being told, you can do nothing, just show sabr. Those who are going through a difficult time, Allah is preparing a house in Jannah for them. You need to trust Allah. Those who are persecuting, Allah is going to build a house in Jahannam for them. Trust Allah. But for now, you can do nothing. Just sit and pray. So imagine, you're hearing the screams and cries of babies and of parents, but there's nothing you can do. You just have to go and console them and tell them sabr, sabr, sabr. That's it. And then, of course, at the same time, the Musa alayhi salam, who was so accustomed to that life of luxury and comfort, he's now living amongst the Israelites. He's no longer living amongst the Pharaoh and in the Pharaoh's palace. He's living amongst the Israelites. He's witnessing the persecution and torture that is taking place. And he has to endure it. He has to endure it with resilience, just like all the other Israelites. And this was his training period. That's why Allah says in the Quran that we had selected him for our service. So we groomed him. We prepared him for our service. Right? That was Musa alayhi salam's training period. And it's because of that that he eventually was able to become an amazing leader of an ummah. A leader who is being revered, admired even today by billions of Muslims, and a prophet who is mentioned the greatest number of times in the Holy Quran. That is the amount of respect that Allah has given him because he was able to unleash that potential that Allah had put inside of him. He was able to pass all of his tests, and that is why even today, whenever we are going through a period of difficulty and hardship, everyone gives the example of Musa. Everyone cites Musa alayhi salam and the kind of things that Musa alayhi salam had to endure. There are billions of Muslims who are actually able to obtain courage and motivation just by listening to the stories of Musa alayhi salam. That is the kind of honor and respect Allah then gave him. It was, these were not qualities Allah had to put inside of him. It was already inside of him, but they only came out when Musa alayhi salam was placed in those kinds of difficult situations. So that is what we have to understand today regarding our own tests and our own hardships. Grieving so much that we fall into depression, that we fall into that victim mentality, we start to blame other people, we start to think that Allah has abandoned us or Allah hates us. That's not what a true believer does. Right? This is the way that life is. There is a reason why sometimes our lives become so difficult. There is a potential Allah wants to help us unleash. There is a service that Allah is preparing us for. We just need to trust the journey. May Allah grant us all forgiveness. May Allah enable the nur of the Quran to penetrate our hearts. May Allah help us all to deal with our tests and hardships. Save us all from immense grief and depression. And may Allah help us all in propagating the message of Islam. Assalamu alaikum.